In the cold, dead, dark air of Mrs. Cobb's house, Turner began to sweat. He lifted his fingers from the keyboard and sat perfectly still. He felt his hearing sharpen and sharpen until it seemed like another sense entirely, reaching out and around him. He listened for a step. He listened for another creak. He listened for breathing. Nothing. He swiveled the organ stool around, slowly, 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 stopping the moment a sound came from it. He opened his eyes as wide as he could. Nothing. He stood, put his hands out in front of him, and groped his way across the parlor. He stuck his head out into the hall and looked back toward the kitchen, but it was too dark to see anything. He turned the other way, then stopped. Suppose there was someone standing there, a pale face at the window? Or suppose there was someone standing in the very hall? He turned quickly, afraid that the fear suddenly welling up in him might overtake him. There was no one in the hall. There was no one at the door. Two more sharp creaks from overhead, like someone walking across the floor and trying not to be heard. He would have to go upstairs. He groped back up the front hall and around to the staircase, not swallowing. He set one foot on the first stair, and then thought that maybe it was Lizzie Bright upstairs warmed him. She knew it was to be her house. Maybe it was so cold on Malaga that she had come in. Maybe she'd meet him at the top of the stairs with her hands on her hips, her head to one side, laughing at him. For less than a second, the thought filled him with relief. For less than a second, because Lizzie had no key. He began to climb the stairs, freezing at every creak he made, freezing at the silences, listening with quick ears for any sound, watching with sharpened eyes for someone to appear suddenly at the head of the stairs. When he reached the top, he crouched down and looked around the hallway. There was more starlight up here, and he could see clearly. 3 open doors and a 4th closed. He stayed still, watching until his crouching legs began to hurt. Then he stood up and moved as silently as a murderer to the first open doorway and peered inside. A bedroom that hadn't been slept in for 100 years. To the second doorway, a sewing room. He could make out the trestle of the sewing machine and the straight-backed chair behind it. To the third doorway, but before he reached it, he heard the creak again, from behind the closed door. He did not move for an eternity or two. Then he figured he could either run down the stairs and out of the house and let whatever was going to happen, or he could pull open the door. Another loud creak decided it. His eyes wide open, he bolted across the hallway, pulled the door open, shouted, "I see!" and smashed into a flight of steep stairs, striking shins, knees, a hip, elbows, and his nose, which began bleeding. But he couldn't stop to staunch it now. He clambered up the stairs with his hands and feet, missing a step and stumbling, picking himself up, all the time crying, "I see you," even though he couldn't see anything. And then suddenly, he was at the top of the stairs and crouching again on a floor as cold as a ledge of granite. And it seemed to him that he was suspended in the night sky over Phippsburg. There was glass all around him, even above him. When he stood, his arms held out for balance, the whole town was laid before him, the houses black against the snow that reflected the silver starlight. The spire of First Congregational rose until it was itself a part of the night sky. He could make out Parker Head heading down to Thayer's hay meadow on the coast, its snowy backside showed between the bare trunks. And above him, straight above him, the stars followed their own tides. He could almost see them move. His knees bent. He could feel the sea breeze wrapping itself around the cupola and leaned into it some, setting the frame to creaking cheerily at the familiar nudge. Turner set his hands against the freezing glass. Wouldn't Lizzie think this was fine, he thought. And with the thought, he stood on his tiptoes and looked out to where Malaga Island lay in the dark of the New Meadows.